Basically, for this session, each of our panelists has got a presentation to deliver. So the way it's going to work for the next 45 minutes is, in a moment, I'm going to get each person to introduce themselves, so you know who they are and where they're from. Then they will each do their presentations in turn. Each presentation will be about 10 minutes. I may have a question or maybe two questions based on the presentation as it is delivered, and then with the time that we have left at the end, we will ask some general questions about this topic of all three of our guests, and maybe there'll be time for one more question again at the end. Let's see if I deliver on that promise this time, like I almost did last time. Okay, so let's start from the far end again. If you just want to quickly introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from.
Hello, I'm Rob, and I'm the Chief Toaster at Toast Ale. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about beer.
Hello, my name is Laura. I used to be, or I still am, an event manager. I organize several festivals, also big dance festivals and also small family festivals. And in 2014, I started Green Events Netherlands, which is a sustainability platform for events, of course. So we help organizers to become more sustainable.
Okay.
And
grab that mic.
Yeah. I can speak into this.
Have one each.
Is it on?
Yeah.
My name is Wicki and I work for the Soil Association. If you live in the UK, then you'll probably know this company as the organic food certifier in the country. But we also certify sustainable timber through the FSC and PEFC schemes, which I'll elaborate on when it's my turn. On top of working for the Soil Association, I'm also a Greener Festival assessor. And it's after starting doing these assessments that I basically got the idea into my head that I thought it might be a good idea to come and talk to you guys about buying certified timber.
Okay, so each of our guests are going to, as I say, give about a 10-minute presentation. So we will start with Laura. So if you just want to grab the clicker and
I will.
hopefully the technology will go through. And yeah, we'll listen to what you've got to say, and then I'll ask some questions afterwards.
So when I just mentioned that I am co-founder of Green Events, and we initiated a Green Deal waste-free festivals in 2015. It's a 3-year cooperation between 9 Dutch festivals, the government, and a foundation which is called Nederlands. They work on litter prevention. And together we aim for waste-free festivals, so we share knowledge and we do all sorts of projects. I will give you some examples of the projects we do. Here you see a material flow analysis, a Sankey diagram made by Metabolic, a partner of ours. The material flow analysis is something that's quite new for us in the event industry, because normally we are used to only look at what kind of waste comes out of festival. But in this way of working, we're really looking into what kind of input is coming in and what goes out, so in and output in total. And that gives a really different view on the whole topic. And another thing we are working on is the introduction of reusable cups. There we have been talking about it more often today, of course. Not a steel cup, but a plastic cup for us. Since a few years, some festivals already are working with it. The municipality of Amsterdam announced, I think 2 weeks ago, that from 2020 on, it's prohibited to use recyclable cups only. So there are a lot of things happening when it comes to reusable cups, because we need to have more cups. The way of cleaning those cups needs to be that has to be upscaled, and the cost has to reduce. So that are all things that we are working on within this project. And another nice example is the composting machine. Somebody is saying yeah over there. Do you know it? You want one? I would like to have one in my garden. And this machine is piloted by one of the festivals within this Green Deal, and Into the Great Wide Open, the festival is called. And the machine you see here, if you put in 100 kilograms of biodegradable waste, 15 kilos of compost will come out on site. So that's a really new way of dealing with your waste. And along the side, we noticed that waste-free feels like a sort of old-school term. We like to think about it as a resource-rich, or even better, circular. And that's the transition that we are in now. And within this transition, Metabolic, the partner we are working with, who is making these nice material flow analysis, they came up with 5 guidelines to become more circular, and I want to share these with you. You don't have to write everything down, because you can read the article about it on our website, and it is in English, although the rest of the site is in Dutch. So if you need some help, send me an email. You have to know your resource flow. So here is this material flow analysis again. So really look into what comes out on your vessel and what goes out in a bigger picture. The second guideline is match your source separation and centralized separation of waste. So really look into it, because you have to first of all the people who are into procurement need to know what will happen with their waste. So they need to know, if, for example, if the bar manager uses PET bottles, he needs to discuss the manager of the waste manager if the processor of the waste can use PET bottles. So that's really important, and of course it has to be the way you proceed with your waste has to be the same as the municipality does, because otherwise you're all separating, and then in the end it will go in the same stream again. And a lot of festivals have been making this mistake in the past. Be wary of biodegradables. A lot of festivals work with biodegradable plates, for example. But in the Netherlands, there is no waste processor that really biodegrades those biodegradables. So that's something that you really need to keep in mind. It still is a sustainable option, if you ask me, because of the production process. It's better to use biodegradables than plastics. The fourth one is watch out for embodied impacts. Here you see a picture of a digital festival, which is a 100% vegetarian festival. I chose this picture because you really need to keep in mind that it's not only about waste, it's also about using of land and water and other embodied impacts, as you all know. And the last one is responsible upcycling. If you want to become circular, you have to really make sure that everything is closed, that it's a closed loop and it stays in the loop. And making bags out of banners. Of course, we like the bags, but you have to make sure that it's not downcycled, but really into the same loop again and again, over and over. And as I said, you can read those guidelines on the website. And to conclude with the last picture, I hope we can make a new group picture next year, because we are working on a new Green Deal, not waste-free, but circular festivals, and we aim for making this cooperation an international one. So maybe there are festivals interested. So please, I will be there for the drinks. So please let me know if you're interested.
Okay.
That will be it.
I have a couple of questions, if I can. So,
sure.
Just to give us a little bit of background, it was 8 festivals that you said?
9.
9 festivals are part of it. And how did the initiative come about to start with? Because you said also it is government-backed. So did it begin with the festivals, or did it begin with government? Who initiated?
It began with the government. The government also has green deals in other sectors. So it's a concept that already exists. And the government contacted us, so they thought that would be a really inspiring sector to work with. And then from there on, we took it over and contacted those festivals and made this group. Yeah.
And the sort of the 5 things in your checklist there, where did that come from? Was it that you all sat around and debated it, or was it through experts saying this is what you should be doing? How did you come up with that list?
Well, the 5 guidelines also were wrote down as a sort of an article. We work with Metabolic, and Metabolic is a consultancy company based in Amsterdam, working on sustainable cities and circular economy. They made those nice diagrams, those material flow analysis, and from that knowledge that they gained working on those festivals with this analysis, they came up with these 5 guidelines. Yeah, but it's also the guidelines that are there. It's also recognizable for the other festivals, so it's not coming out of nothing, of course. Yeah.
And as you seek to go international, I mean, is that truly international, or will you initially be focusing on other European events? And do you see those 5 guidelines as being part of that, or could there be a new set of guidelines once you go global?
Yeah, there are more questions. I think it can be truly international, but the first step would be European, I guess. And the second question, I forgot now.
So will your starting point be to encourage
those 5
guidelines?
Yeah. No, I hope to have 10 guidelines at the end of next year. So if you have more information to share and you have more guidelines and more things other organizers can use to become circular, that would be great. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I thought the interesting thing there, which we may come back to the questions later, you were saying with the recycling, when you have a recycling supplier, is knowing what they can recycle and informing the people who are bringing things on site, and also be quite interested in how are you recycling and exactly what are you. We're not just sort of sending it off and thinking, we've done our bit now, it's gone off to recycling plants, and taking an interest. So part of the conversation here is really understanding what all of your suppliers.
The whole supply chain is part of this.
Yeah, rather than waving it and thinking you've done a good thing, and then who knows what happens once it reaches the other end. Okay, so that's the first of our 3 presentations for this section. So let's have the second one now. So we'll pass the mic across, and if you want to grab the clicker.
Oh yes, figure out how that works.
Just to the right, I think. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, right. So preaching a bit to the converted, but basically I'm here to talk about the use of trying to use more sustainable timber. And obviously, pretty much all of us in here have heard all the horrible stories of what's going on in the forests around the world, how the Amazon has been chopped down to make way for soy and cattle, and how the Indonesian rainforest has been taken down to make way for palm plants. Forest conservation is also seen as a way of mitigating climate change, but across the world, forests are just taken down by industrialization and development. Also, the world is finally realizing what a horrible material plastic is and what a burden it is on the environment. And therefore, it's really important that we recognize the positives there are with using a renewable resource such as timber. But obviously, the resource is only renewable if they're managed responsibly, and that's where certification of forest and timber products come in. So FSC, or the Forest Stewardship Council, and PEFC, or the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, are certification schemes based on international standards. So just like you've got MSC for sustainable marine products, or fair trade for your bananas or coffee or tea, there's FSC and PEFC for sustainable timber and responsibly sourced wood and timber products in general. Both the scheme standards are based around the 3 pillars of environmental, social and economic aspects. For example, FSC have 3 guiding principles that they base all their standards on. And some examples of these are, for example, workers' rights from the social perspective, benefits from the forest from the economic aspects, and high conservation values from the environmental perspective. And to just give you a couple of examples of how certification have benefited people that so far in the communities. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner there, this is a picture of the Mpingo Conservation and Development Initiative in Tanzania. They've been certified since 2009, and in 2016 they got an award from something called the Whitley Foundation, that awards grants for nature conservation and other environmental programs. And they got this grant, and which basically means that they've received a grant, and that's going to help them with their ongoing development. So the situation as it was before, historically, land rights were unclear in that region, and people didn't have any incentive to care for their land. or the wildlife in the land. But thanks to the requirements of the certification, and they are quite strict, the MCDI, the Conservation and Development Initiative, are empowering the local communities to change this. Excuse me. Through sustainable management of Mpingo, which is also called African blackwood, which is actually quite often used for the manufacture of musical instruments and for guitars and especially what's it called? Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Woodwind instruments? Yeah, that's it. So clarinets and things like that, basically, because of the texture of the timber, it's really good for musical instruments. The other example is the bottom right-hand corner. It's from the Katingan Farmers Rattan Group in Borneo, which represents more than 200 farmers. And basically, there wasn't any formal recognition of who owned the land or who had the right to harvest the rattan, so the fields were just being left barren. But with the certification, there's been an increase in the value of the rattan and in the value of people's feeling of self and being part of their community. So they feel secure and they maintain their rattan fields. And there's quite a big investment in this going on. So this particular project was actually financially supported by IKEA through cooperation with WWF. And you're finding that quite a lot of these larger organizations that use a lot of timber are being part of these kind of projects. So us as day-to-day consumers, we don't really necessarily, well, probably a lot of us do, but a lot of people don't think about where the materials that they use come from. So we're talking about from you get up in the morning to go to the toilet till you go to bed in your nice wooden beds at night. And even more so as an event, what can you do to partake in the responsible timber procurement? Again, I'm sure that there's a lot of the events in this room that already consider this. But one thing to think about when you're actually looking at buying something, whether it's your printer paper or whether it's your plywood for your toilets or the wood chips for when it's raining, is the fact that you can ask for this certified. So if you consider all of the materials you generally use when you're putting on an event, so whether it's paper, card, timber, whatever it is, whatever it came from trees, you can always think about whether there's a certified option for this. I've just put some examples of things. I found a picture of somebody's actually made a brochure for a festival, with certification on, just to give you an idea of all the different things you can get certified. On the slide, there is a link to the FSC website where you can get this information, and there is a similar one on the PEFC website as well. So one more thing to consider is if you want to kind of go the extra mile in regards of making something special out of using sustainable timber products for your events, you can actually get what's called project certification. And if I just read a quote from the FSC website, it basically states that individual objects or buildings of any scale that are built or renovated on a one-off basis can achieve FSC certification. The FSC standard for project certification can also be used for civil engineering products and events such as exhibitions and festivals. So far, I'm not aware of this has actually happened, although I know there has been a few attempts that hasn't come to play because of logistical reasons. So there are obviously particulars. You can basically gain either what's called full certification for like a whole stage, let's say, or you could get partial certification. So if you wanted to say that all of the all the floors in your bars or something like that was made out of, so that's an option that you can take. If I just give you some examples, I'll put up some nice pictures here. There are stipulations, obviously. There has to be people responsible for actually, overseeing this whole project. You have to make sure that you record all of the materials that you're buying and that you're using. And there has to be solid procedures in place to make sure that you're not mixing uncertified and certified materials. And if it was a soil association that was doing the certification of the project, we would come out to audit you 2 or 3 times just to see how it sort of went, to make sure that everything was going to plan. So just a few examples, I'll just give you a couple of these. The top left-hand corner, so in 2012, the Soil Association certified the London Olympics. All of the timber that was used on site was either FSC or PEFC certified. Another one that's quite nice is in 2014, an entire house in Denmark was the first entire residential dwelling to be given full FSC certification. The other one there is a boat in Japan, and then there's a house in Spain made entirely out of straw, bale, mud, or PFC certified materials. So yeah, that's it really. Yeah, if you want to know any more, then come and see me. I'm around for the rest of the day.
Fantastic, thank you. So almost as 2 levels of certification there, which is the certification of the products that you're buying in, but then potentially your event and the constructions you are creating at your event could be certified as well.
Yeah.
So you can buy certified and be certified. And it was interesting, yeah, you brought up musical instruments there. I think that's sort of, it may be that you have an event where everything is incredibly, you've been very good and you've made sure your suppliers have that certification. It'd be interesting to know if all the instruments on stage then are actually sort of terribly sourced wood actually being played on stage, and almost we need to pass it on to the artist community. I don't know, do musical instruments have certification? If I'm buying a guitar, could I be making sure it has a certification on there?
Yeah, so actually it's mainly guitars that are FSC certified. You can go online and you can, I had a quick look in the train up just to have a look to see. Yeah, so I say it's mainly guitars, but because of the grain, particularly in this African blackwood, it's got a particular kind of strength and resonance that basically works really well with wooden instruments.
So it is worth educating artists as they're coming in, saying we're being very environmentally friendly. Next time you buy your instrument, do check that.
Yeah.
That's and just one quick other aside is if would most suppliers of products that ultimately start with a tree, so say that could be paper products, it could be the wood you're using, you would expect a supplier to understand what these certifications are. So if you say, can I just confirm this product is certified, a supplier should know, and almost if they don't know, then you should be suspicious.
Well, as a matter of fact, and I was talking to somebody about this earlier on, is if you want to sell something as FSC or PEFC certified, then everybody in the entire supply chain have to be certified. So the forest where the tree came from initially has to be certified. The mill that buys this off the forest has to be certified, and then the secondary and so forth. So in order for you to be able to sell something with the FSC logo you yourself have to be certified. And that's the way that you basically guarantee that you're buying something from a sustainable resource.
So you're a certified supplier and then check the actual products are certified.
Yes, and you can go on to the FSC and PEFC websites to obviously check that your suppliers actually are certified and they're not just saying it, because a lot of people that sell timber products are aware of the credibility that goes with the FSC and PEFC labels, so they'll use them even if they're not necessarily certified. So it's always worth just double checking your suppliers. Yeah,
which comes back to where we were before, which is knowing what your suppliers are and then doing the homework and the double checking. Okay, let's get our final presentation on now. Something a little bit different, but going back, I suppose, to the recycling thing and an interesting implementation of that aim, which is will speak to many festival goers.
Wicked, thank you. So I'm the latest Wilson in this clan of Wilsons taken over the day. My namesake Bob at the back. So I'm Rob Wilson. I'm Chief Toaster of Toast Ale, and I'd love to introduce you to Toast. We are on a mission to prove that the alternative to food waste is freaking delicious and indeed pint-sized or bottle-sized. So what we do is we brew our now award-winning beer using fresh surplus bread that would otherwise go to waste. And what we like to say is with a slice of bread, there's a slice of bread in there somewhere, so with a slice of bread in every bottle and 100% of our profits poured into charity, we think we're the best thing since you know what. So we think food waste is basically one of the biggest issues of our time. I think I am preaching to the converted when I say that. A third of the food that we produce in the world goes to waste. Over 1 billion tons of food in the world goes to waste. And basically our whole Toast journey started a couple of years ago when a good friend of ours, Tristram Stewart, we were chatting in a pub, and he is a food waste warrior, advocate, best-selling author. He's the kind of guru of fighting food waste. He and I were having a chat a couple of years ago, and he'd just come back from a trip to Brussels where he'd tried a beer called Babylon that had been brewed with bread, and it was called Babylon because the first ever beer recipe that's ever been discovered from 5,000 years ago was brewed with bread. And for thousands of years, that's how bread was made. That's how beer was made. That was the norm, was that you would use bread that would otherwise go to waste. And so Tristan and I were chatting, and he's kind of done loads to raise awareness about food waste. So, like, it's hitting the global headlines. Even the Daily Mail are talking about food waste. You know, things are getting pretty serious when the Daily Mail get involved. And he basically said, Rob, let's start up this beer company. We had a few of us involved, and it was like, just how about we do this? Let's get wasted on waste. Let's turn all of the bread that would otherwise go to waste into beer. I was like, mate, you have me at beer, so let's just get started. So he's kind of made me and so many of us aware, but you might not yet be aware, but you will be now, that bread is the worst food waste offender of them all. So 44% of the bread that we bake in this country goes to waste. It is absolutely bonkers. And for thousands of years, we made delicious beer with bread. And so what we did is we just put two and two together, and we started brewing up our beer, and we replaced 1/3 of the malted barley in the brewing process with bread, yesterday's bread, sometimes it's today's bread, that's ultimately going to waste. And we brew it up into our toast beer. So we started the business on 4 core principles. Like, first and foremost, tastes fucking awesome. It's really tasty. You'll love it. You're going to try some at 6 o'clock. Hope you all enjoy it. And like, we present it well. It's just meant to be a really well presented, really tasty beer. Forget our nice cuddly story, and we do have a slightly cuddly story, but if you forget about that, it's just good beer that just stands out on its own, it's price competitive. And people like Jamie Oliver have given us the thumbs up. We're like sold in Michelin star restaurants, as well as places like Waitrose and now Tesco's as well. So we've got a really broad spectrum of awesome customers on board and stockists on board because it just tastes good. But we also have some really fun principles behind the business as well. So secondly, we're trying to end bread waste through the beer industry. So we've open sourced our recipe. That's been downloaded 20,000 times. We've started a bit of a home brewing revolution where we've got home brewers all around the world brewing up our bread beer recipes. We get all of our bread from the sandwich industry. So we are addicted to sandwiches in this country. We just love them. And we eat millions of sandwiches every single day. And the end slice, the heel of a loaf, is surplus to requirements. That gets chucked in the bin in a sandwich factory. And so sandwich factories deliver their bread to us free of charge because it's cheaper for them to give us their bread than it is to pay to dispose of it, because obviously they can't just go and flight it bread on the side of the road. They have to dispose of it. So they're delighted to partner with us to help us actually brew it up. And then we're also trying to raise awareness about food waste. So it's all about trying to communicate some of these facts and stats, like 44% of bread, 1/3 of the food, billion tons, all these stats that we're probably very familiar with, but trying to communicate them to a broader audience in a really fun and accessible way. So we're not trying to be preachy, we're not trying to be righteous, we're definitely not holier than thou. It is beer at the end of the day. And we think we can communicate one of the most urgent issues of our time in an accessible way to consumers, and a really delicious way. And then the final part of our kind of business principle is that we donate 100% of our profits to a food waste charity called Feedback. And this friend of ours, Tristram, founded Feedback, and Feedback have really pioneered what it is to be fighting food waste. Their systems changing, they've changed government policy, retail behaviour, consumer behaviour. So things like ugly and wonky fruits and vegetables and all the juices and the smoothies that you kind of see around. Feedback really pioneered that whole concept years ago, and now it's started to really break through and become very mainstream in the last few years. And so really pleased to support them. So we pay ourselves, pay our team, there's a few of us involved, but we just don't earn whopping salaries, and we don't pay ourselves huge, crazy kind of bonuses, and we don't take profits out of the business. We give all those profits away to charity. Then underpinning all of it is our mission statement, which is why I'm here to kind of speak to you, because our mission statement is ultimately, if you want to change the world, you've got to throw a better party than the folks destroying it. And we think that the best way to get a good party started is really good beer. And so I'm hoping a few of you might be interested in introducing toast into your festivals. We've been going 2 years. We've had some great success when it comes to selling our beer in shops, and like I said, we've got some big retailers behind us as well, but we haven't at all broken into the sort of events and festivals world. So many of our customers, as you can imagine, are festival goers, are customers that are really conscious about the environment, are conscious consumers, and we the number of times we've had people saying, so how many festivals are you serving your beer at, and which festivals you're at? We're we haven't even tried yet, we haven't started going down that route. So we would love any of you, if you think this is like half interesting. If you try our beer and you think it's half nice, hopefully you'll think it's really nice. We would just love to hear from you. So I'm rob@toastale.com. You can check us out on our website, toastale.com. And just please come and grab us, because we would really love to see toast as the beer of choice. We also have this wild and wacky idea to collect all of the bread from your festivals as well at the end of the festivals, because we know that bread is one of the biggest food wastes at the end of festivals as well. So see if we can collect up some of the bread waste to maybe brew up some beers for next year's festivals. Beer lasts for a long time, so we could have some fun doing that as well. And that's kind of it, really. So yeah, raise a toast to ending food waste in a really delicious way. Let's save the world, one beer at a time. Let's party to save the world. And yeah, cheers.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a really boring, technical, tedious question now after you've roused everybody with your mission. You said you can use yesterday's bread. So I suppose so therefore I'm assuming that means it can't be stale bread. So how quickly do you need to get the bread into the brewing machine?
So we typically brew within sort of 3 or 4 days of the bread being baked. So obviously there is absolutely no mold on the bread. Mouldy bread is not good for the brewing process, but it can be stale bread for sure. But our bread typically is actually day fresh, so we get it from sandwich factories where by the time you eat your sandwich in a Pret or a Costa or wherever you buy your sandwiches from, you will ultimately be eating bread that's kind of 2 or 3 days old once it's gone through the supply chain. We get it whilst it's still day fresh and it's baked that morning, and by the afternoon it can be in our brewery. So, and then we brew all sorts of different types of bread. And I'd love to have this more romantic idea of all of us on pedal bikes with baskets collecting baguettes from bakeries. but the reality is that bread waste is happening at an industrial scale, and so we get bread from
Can it be
factories.
different breads going in at the same time, or does it need to be all white or all brown or all wholemeal?
No. So we mix and match, and it's really the carbohydrates. Obviously, the sort of slightly techie, sciencey bit is just the carbohydrates and the starch and the sugars that you're basically turning into alcohols when you add the yeast. The rest of the brewing process is exactly the same hops, same barley, same malted barley that you're using as the majority. So 2/3 malted barley, 1/3 surplus bread, and everything else. And so we can use some and then the more artisanal the bread, typically it has more salt in, and so it's not often the best bread to be brewing, because then you have quite a salty beer, which is great for a dark beer. You might have a nice salted caramel flavour, but for a lager or a pale ale, you don't want it to be salty. That would really freak you out. And so for our beer, it's typically your kind of mainstream sort of whites and browns and wholemeal breads.
You mentioned that you're encouraging some people to homebrew using this method. Because if we were to persuade every festival in the country to set aside their bread at the end, there would then be the challenge it's all over the country. Presumably, I don't know where you're brewing. Are you brewing in one place?
So at the moment we're brewing in one place in Yorkshire, but we have a grand vision to ultimately. So we did this back of a napkin calculation where if you took all of the bread that goes to waste in the world and all the beer that's consumed in the world, you basically put those two together, and if you did replace 1/3 of the malted barley, it matches like for like to the decimal point. Because back in the day, thousands of years ago, we had it right as society. We just kind of knew that bread was cheap to make and it's got good margins on it. So you make a lot of it and you sell a lot of it, but you don't want to waste it, so you then brew it. Whereas now we've forgotten that just common sense approach. And so what we want to do is mainstream this concept, and so we open source the recipe. We want to see collaboration brews all over the country, so even partnering festivals with local breweries to then brew a kind of a toast festival collab beer straight after the festival and then sell it into the local community. We're a very, very collaborative approach, so we've done all sorts of collaboration brews, and that's one way that we could also get around this idea of dealing with kind of the national consequence of bread waste from the festival scene during the summer.
So I'm going to quickly sort of come back to Laura, because I suppose it's a really novel, innovative approach. And I suppose what it sort of illustrates is when you're a festival organiser, and we're here talking about how to make things as sustainable as possible from source right the way through the event, is looking at every single possible aspect of your event and saying, okay, we're doing well there, we're doing good over here. What else is there on site that we could be making more sustainable and to improve it overall? Would you agree with me? Yes.
Yes, I would agree with you. Is it still working? Did you put it on?
No.
Yeah, okay. I agree. It would be best if you look into the whole supply chain and with every supplier. But I would advise to just begin with the biggest things, because it's a lot, of course. Yeah.
Are there, if obviously most people in this room are probably already ahead of this, but if we were talking to a festival where sort of environmental sustainability hasn't been a key part of their ethos up until now, but they are coming round for whatever reason, what are the obvious starting points, and are there any sort of quirky, innovative ideas that you think might sort of appear quite high up that list?
Well, if it comes to waste, I heard somebody ask this question earlier today, I believe. The biggest part of waste comes from the building material, so the wood that we are talking about. So that would be the number one issue to look into. And the other one is, of course, the disposables, the cups and the plates. It's not a really big part in waste, in weight mostly, but it's really visible for visitors. So that would be the first things that I would look into it. Yeah.
And it was interesting in your presentation you talked about sort of, so you're saying caution of biodegradables, that they're better but they're not perfect. And I suppose, you know, how do people go about working out, okay, yes, that's sort of better, but what happens once it gets off-site? How does it get to a recycling plant? I mean, is that just asking questions? Are there books that you can be reading on that? How do people learn?
Asking questions. I don't believe there are books because it's a really innovative thing that what's happening today can be old news tomorrow. And in every region, not only in every country, but even in every village, the rules and regulations and the way, and not maybe rules and regulations, but the way waste is processed is different. So you have to really ask questions every time you organize a festival. You again talk to your waste suppliers and ask them what's possible and what's not. Yeah.
I mean, Rob. I mean, presumably, given that there are various elements to your business, but the environmental impact is part of it. So presumably when you built the business, then all of the other aspects of the supply chain of your beer, that was something that you had to consider, that the other aspects needed to fit in with the overall ethos.
It does, absolutely. It's something that we're actually really conscious of challenging ourselves and pushing ourselves more and more, actually. And so we're reviewing all of our packaging, all of our supply chain, constantly to try and think, okay, how can we be more environmentally sound? Because we're not, at the moment, environmentally sound enough when it comes to our entire holistic process. We have obviously focused first and foremost on food waste, and that's our primary objective. And now, sort of 2 years on, with the luxury of maybe a little bit more capacity in the team, to then start thinking, okay, how do we take an even more holistic approach? But we then also, I suppose, don't beat ourselves up too much for not being like absolutely perfect on everything. I think you can only do sort of so much, and so we try our best, but we're also aware, and I guess allow ourselves to be aware that we have some mistakes in the process as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's being aware but being realistic at the same time.
True.
Don't be so in awe of what you want to achieve that actually you never get around to doing anything. It's making those steps in the right direction. I think we do have time for the question. Do we have time for our audience question? We have a question here. Well, look, we have to. Oh no, there's loads of questions. Okay, well we'll start with you.
My question's for Wicki, really. What are your thoughts on as plastics start to get banned and outlawed, particularly around plastic bags internationally? Are you aware of, and what are your thoughts on the demand on paper and timber products going a bit crazy as people look for that as a more sustainable alternative?
It's certainly, I mean, strangely enough, in regards of certification and looking at it from sort of the PEFC and FSC perspective, it's actually a little bit. What you're actually finding is that people's practices are getting better anyway, if you see what I mean. So actually, there is a bigger trend in regards to companies. So yeah, food containers and stuff like that, and that is one of the things that we're seeing is that there's quite a lot of, especially in Europe, companies that are manufacturing more and more of wooden and cardboard, food containers. It's certainly something that have come into the Soil Association's general kind of knowledge, that the whole thing about packaging. So the organisation is now actually making a focus on packaging and having to make people aware of the fact that there are more sustainable alternatives to that. It's still very much in an early stage from our perspective, but it's definitely something the organisation is looking to go into. From a business perspective, I'm not quite sure about it. But
were you sort of thinking if there's a sudden demand for paper products, people will cut corners, and then perhaps...
There is. I mean, globally, the papers market particularly, there's like, I think even an 8-month delay in some of the factories internationally, just because the demand is so high for people product type from plastic to paper as well. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, sorry, no, I didn't catch it from that perspective. No, I guess I'm not really seeing it from the manufacturing perspective, more from, when the manufacturers have made it. Yeah.
Can I take another question? Yeah, go on. Okay, I think you had your hand up before, so we'll come to you, and then if we have time, we'll come back to you.
I have a philosophical question on Laura. Quick introduction. If we consider that going for a festival is having an impact on the planet from point of view of visitor, it might be better for the planet if I stay home or go for hiking. So how do but the question is to Laura, to set up an acceptable impact of the festival experience in the green event. If you think about what would be the acceptable environmental impact of visiting a festival to so we can have the festival experience in a good consciousness.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure if all festivals are that bad for the environment, because if you stay at home and you put on the heat and listen to music and make your own dinner, and that will that will produce CO2 also. So in some cases, it's better if you just gather and do it together. And I think that the biggest impact, or the most important impact festivals can make, is that they are really they can have an impact and influence the behavior of the visitors in a real broad sense. So it's not only about this festival at that one day, but it's what you can achieve if you look in it to a broader sense. So if you can just plant a seed and let your visitor think about the environment, about becoming more sustainable or becoming circular, in the end, that impact will be much more important than only the impact of that day, of that event. Is that okay for you? Can we still party on?
Maybe take the one last question. We're now eating into your coffee break, so so one last question.
Laura, you mentioned the composting machine, eco-creation. How quickly is a compost be created?
24 hours.
24 hours?
Yeah, so for 100 kilos of biodegradable waste, will turn into 15 kilos of compost in 24 hours. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, it's really, yeah. Eco-creation it's called, so you can Google it, yeah.
Okay. Right, well, our time is up, and we're all now going into a coffee break. I think all three of you are around for the rest of the day, so if people have other questions, come and grab them. But maybe a quick round of applause for my second panel. Thank you.